Hey guys, what is up, and I welcome each and every one of you to a new League of Legends video. So today we'll be taking an early look into patch 9.10 and see exactly what's on the horizon to come for us in the next patch. So if you end up enjoying this video, then don't forget to hit that like button, but this video, as usual, is going to be made and edited by Pro Guides. It is a website that helps you improve your overall League of Legends gameplay and knowledge, and they are now free. Check them out with the link down below. Alright, so the first obvious big change coming out on the next patch is of course going to be Yuumi. Yuumi is currently on the PBE server. I have made several gameplay videos of her already. If you haven't checked them out, then I highly recommend you do so. But essentially this champion is a support champion that is going to be the first champion that can also become essentially untargetable by champions as long as you attach yourself to another champion, of course being an ally champion. When you're on an allied champion, your Q ability is essentially a missile that you control with your mouse, which is pretty cool, and it does a bunch of damage once it hits someone and also does a good amount of slow. You can use your W to jump between allies to give them extra bonuses passively as you are on them based on your current stats, and you get stats from them as well for yourself, which is pretty cool. And on top of this, your E ability is just a very simple heal, and your ultimate is essentially Sona ultimate just several times in a row. Not as bursty as a Sona ultimate, but there's 7, I believe, waves of her ultimate instead, and if you get hit by at least 3 of them, you get snared. All in all, this champion is nothing just completely out of this world crazy. It's a fairly simple champion for the most part, fairly simple mechanics as well, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, you know? It's a breath of fresh air, something basic, something simple, but something also very polished and actually surprisingly a lot of fun to play. So definitely look forward to Yuumi coming out in the next patch in just about a week. Moving along, let's talk about a mini rework coming over to Malphite. Now, I did make a gameplay video of this as well. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you do so as well. But let's go over the changes very quickly. Starting off with his passive, a very minor change, but a cool one nonetheless. It's a visual change to where now as he gets back his actual molten armor, it just looks a lot cooler. But moving on to his Q ability, the range in this ability has actually been increased and the missile speed has also been increased. It also now spawns a little bit further ahead of Malphite, so TLDR, longer range, and it gets to your target much faster. On the flip side, however, the AP ratio on this ability has been slightly lowered, and you'll see why very soon. It no longer steals movement speed, instead now it just reduces movement speed and gives Malphite a base amount of movement speed, so it's not relative to how much you steal. But moving on to his W, it is now completely renamed. It is called Thunderclap rather than Brutal Strikes, and now it does something somewhat similar. When you activate it, well, you now get an extra damaged auto attack that just does a lot of damage and also scales decently well off of AP, being a 0.4 ratio, which is why his Q abilities ratio went down. On top of this, the next 4 auto attacks will also do a bunch of extra damage similar to Titanic Hydra, but all of this also scales off of AP. So in other words, you have an actual real W ability now as opposed to the current Malphite on the live servers. In other words, if you're playing tank Malphite, well, you actually get bigger as you get more armor, which is pretty cool. But also, you just do so much more damage with Malphite in general now because it also scales off of armor that you have an actual ability now that's useful and actually good. And last but not least, his ultimate just got some visual effects as well, where in his base skin, it now creates an impact crater as you ult the ground. So some pretty sweet changes coming over to Malphite. I mean, nothing completely outstanding, you know, nothing completely just game-changing, but his W, now being an actual ability, will make Malphite much more of a deadly champion in my honest opinion. Moving along, we also have some pretty significant changes coming over to Master Yi, more specifically towards his Q ability Alpha Strike. No longer does it have a cast time, and on top of this, whenever he uses a Q on his target, if there's no one else around that target, it'll actually strike the same target over and over for 25% of the damage before checking again, and if there's no one else around, it'll keep striking the same target. So in other words, think of way back in the days when you had the old Fiora ultimate that would just consistently strike the same target or at least other targets nearby. Well, that's essentially Master Yi's Q now, just a lot less emphasized. This is fantastic when it comes to 1v1ing, but also fantastic for jungle Master Yi, so when you do red buff or blue buff, Scuttle Crab, Dragon, even Baron, your Q is just much more useful. But this also means that when you're attacking a single target, you will be in your Q for a little bit longer, which means late game, it might actually be less effective since you want to auto attack more often than not, and you want to use the Q just to dodge something, right? But now, using the Q late game on one target, you'll actually stay in that animation for a very long time, so technically you're actually losing DPS. His W no longer has a cast time as well, his E ability Wuju Style no longer grants attack speed while not on cooldown, and his ultimate, the movement speed has been changed from being up to 45% multiplicative to now just being starting at 40 and going up to 60% bonus. The duration has been increased by 2 seconds, but the duration extension has been lowered by 2 seconds instead. Moving along to our favorite top laner in League of Legends, Riven. Now, Riven is getting some changes as well, where her Q, Broken Wings, the cooldown has been lowered from being 13 at all ranks to now starting at 12 rank 1, but going all the way down to 10 seconds by rank 5. So in other words, you'll be seeing Riven in her Q animation much more often. Moving on to her E, Valor, her cooldown on this ability has been increased to now being 14 seconds rank 1 rather than 10, but then by the time you rank it up to rank 5, it's now still 4 seconds up compared to before being 10 seconds as opposed to currently 6 seconds. So a nerf to her E ability definitely, because now she can't spam that as often, but so they don't really just ruin her mobility, her Q ability has a lower cooldown. Honestly, I don't know if that's a buff or a nerf. I mean, she'll have more damage, but she's also going to have less sustainability since she can't use her E ability as often. I think it's a worthy trade-off for people facing Riven personally, because I think her E ability, the fact that it gives her that much of a shield, that low of a cooldown, and it scales off of AD is way too overpowered. So I would say personally an overall nerf to Riven if I had to guess. Next up, we have the Teemo Mini-Rework back on the PBE server once again. It's been a while I haven't talked about it, so let's go over it very quickly. The TLDR is his passive is his old E ability where it just does dot damage, but the damage stacks based on other poison dots on the target, whether it's from Teemo himself or allied champions like Cassiopeia or Singed. Your Q ability is essentially the same, it just does less damage and has a mana increase cost. Your W no longer breaks stealth. Your E ability is essentially your old passive, but now it's an active ability where after a 2-second delay, you become invisible, you see farther, you still attack faster when you come out of the invisibility as well, and if you're inside a bush, you can stay invisible indefinitely. And his ultimate now also does less damage overall, but what you can now do is actually stack up to 5 shrooms in terms of the actual max ammo count as opposed to just being 3. So in other words, Teemo is just much more effective at being a split pusher rather than just putting shrooms all over the map and then watching people die from walking into a single shroom late game, because again, it does less damage, but if you stack your poisons properly, you'll be doing more damage. So you're kind of forced to be in the middle of the action much more often now than being a kind of global Teemo ultimate mushroom assault person. Moving along, we have some changes coming over to Vayne as well towards her ultimate final hour. The tumble cooldown reduction has been changed from 50% at all ranks to now starting at 30, going up to 50. Not the biggest nerf in the entire world for Vayne, but it will nerf her early to mid game by just a bit, but essentially be the exact same thing by the time you get to late game. I guess the idea here is to try and weaken her early to mid game so that by the time she does get to late game, well, you deserve to be strong, but you're not as strong when you shouldn't be. We also have a buff coming over to Xin Zhao to where his Q ability 3 talent strike has had its AD ratio increased by 10% and the cooldown has also been lowered. So a little bit better, of course, maybe in the jungle to use it more often or for ganks and stuff like that, because it will just do more damage, right? But it'll also scale a little bit better now. So just an overall pretty solid buff for Xin without taking it completely overboard. Now let's move on to some changes coming over to items, starting off with the Guinsoo's Rage Blade. Now this one got some pretty big changes where now the phantom hit frequency has been changed from every 2 auto attacks to every 3 auto attacks. So in other words, you'll need a lot of attack speed now to make this item actually worthwhile, because it just takes a full extra auto to use it for what people actually buy it for, right? Proccing extra on hit effects. But just so it isn't all bad for these type of users that actually build this item, the armor penetration and the magic penetration has now been set to 15% period, rather than starting at 6% and scaling up as you level. So what this means is essentially the item overall definitely got a nerf, so not only is it just not as good on some champions, but you need a lot of attack speed. But this also means that you don't want to get this item too early on into the game, because now that it gives 15% penetration for armor and magic, it's a much more effective item getting it around maybe mid game, or at least maybe as a 3rd item, I would say, as opposed to some champions that get a 2nd item or even 1st. Because like I said, you actually need some attack speed now to make it worthwhile. We also have a quick buff coming over to Essence Reaver where the AD has been increased by 5. I mean, not the end of the world, nothing too crazy, but it will make the item a little bit more tempting for some AD carries, though I still don't think most will buy it. And you also have Runic Echoes being the AP jungle item, where the total cost has just flat out been lowered by 125 gold. Also, not the biggest change in the entire world, but you know, it is still a buff regardless, and maybe this will make some AP junglers slowly creep back into the meta. We also have some changes coming over to Conquer, one of the most abusable keystones in League of Legends for the longest time I can remember. The full stack damage converted to healing and true damage has been lowered by 2%, which is a very good change, but this also means that the tank meta is even more so slowly approaching, because whenever things like this get nerfed and items like Rage Blade get nerfed, that just tells me one thing, man, the tank meta is definitely on its way back. I still think it'll take a few more patches, but man, it is, I can almost smell it. And last but not least, let's talk about the newest skins coming out as well because they are extremely sexy. We have the new Battle Academia skins for Ezreal, Jace, Katarina, Lux, and Battle Professor Graves, and on top of this, also the Battle Academia Lux Prestige Edition. Personally, I think the Ezreal one is by far the best. I mean, it is the legendary one, so it kind of makes sense, but my goodness, this skin is wonderful. And especially for myself, someone that actually plays Ezreal AD carry now, I am very excited for this skin to come out because my goodness, does it look wonderful. And the inner weeb inside of me just kind of wants to play it so badly. But either way, guys, that is about it for this video. There you have it, a bunch of changes already on the PBE server ready to ship out for the next patch, even though it is still, of course, a week away. Let me know what you think about them down below. Let me know which change you think is the biggest one and the most impactful one. But either way, guys, thank you all so much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace.